meant much to all of us. The loss of Malathi meant much to all of us. And in her work, sorry, are we on now?
We're on.
Okay, sorry. The loss of Malathi meant much to all of us. And in order to honor her legacy of work, 6 women, Chulani Kodikara, Sonali Deraniyagala, Kanchana Ruwanpura, Radhika Coomaraswamy, Vraie Balthazaar, and myself came together to compile a book of selected essays from her vast body of work, supported by the International Center for Ethnic Studies. Hello, I'm Caryll Tozer. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to the book launch of Her Smile Lingers, selected essays by Malathi de Alwis. Malathi was many things to many different people. She was a friend, mentor, teacher, feminist, anthropologist, activist, scholar, writer, birder, and wildlife enthusiast. When she left us 1 year ago, she left a deep void in many people's lives. But at the same time, she lives on in her work as an anthropologist and as one of the most prolific and important scholars of our time, who consistently tried to bridge between disciplines and traditions of anthropology and feminism. Her PhD, which was titled Maternalist Politics in Sri Lanka, a historical anthropology of its conditions of possibility, on the struggle for truth and justice waged by the Southern Mothers Front after the second JVP insurrection, was a path-breaking work. It made a significant contribution to the feminist scholarship, theorizing the politics of motherhood in the wake of mass atrocity through the 80s and 90s. During her lifetime, Malathi authored more than 60 articles on a number of related themes, such as violence and the long afterlives, Sinhala Buddhist nationalism and its construction of the good woman, the relationship between the nation and its women, the politics of mourning, memorialization, and monuments, as well as the limits and possibilities of political activism, feminist or not. Yet, this work was scattered across several edited volumes and journal articles and not easily accessible. Moreover, her PhD thesis was never published. So this volume that we are launching today brings together 12 articles written by Malathi between 1994 and 2016. Our task of selecting the articles for this volume was made easier by the fact that Mala had chosen a set of articles for translation in Sinhala before she passed away. It is those same articles that we have included in this volume. We have published the articles in their original versions without any revisions and only standardized the style and format of text and citations. All of us in the editorial team worked as a collective in the spirit of feminist solidarity. In a sense, this was the common bond that we all shared with her, the interest in feminism and feminist activism in Sri Lanka. We hope it will inspire those who are already familiar with her work to read anew her writing. We also hope that it introduces a new generation of readers to her scholarship. Malathi spent a lot of time mentoring young scholars. Therefore, through this volume, we believe that Malathi will continue to enlighten and illuminate. I would like to share with Sonali now the mic. Sonali, over to you, please. Please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Caryll, and hello, everybody. As Caryll mentioned, of course, we all know that this book brings together a collection of essays by our friend and also our colleague, Malathi de Alwis. Malathi, we all also know that Malathi was a truly brilliant scholar of Sri Lanka. A pioneering anthropologist, as Caryll mentioned, she was also a cultural critic, teacher, naturalist, and activist. But in her essence, we know that Malathi transcended all of this. For me, Malathi was a consciousness, and for all of us too, a consciousness that worked delicately, but always with absolute force to look at how a nation's history is marked by turbulence, injustice, suffering, resistance. Malathi's scholarly work interrogated issues that are central to contemporary Sri Lanka: gender and feminism, political violence and war, grief and memory. And the essays we include here, as Caryll said, address all these themes. They showcase Malathi's adeptness at fusing sophisticated theory with the granular details of lived experience. This rare skill, I think, reflects who Malathi really was. She was a highly trained anthropologist who was passionately devoted to understanding the communities she worked among. Mala was always observing, listening, participating. So several essays in this volume deal with the women's movement in Sri Lanka. And we see Malathi constantly questioning narratives, even her own. Her scholarship on female sexuality ranged far and wide. This volume also includes her pioneering essay on the Sigiri frescoes, which was pathbreaking in its questioning of the narrative of female sexuality, domesticity, and so on in early Sri Lankan post-colonial history. In the essays on memory and memorialization, we see her extraordinary way of mixing the emotional with the intellectual. Throughout this volume, we see again and again how Malathi's writings had the power to surprise. And we see how she refused lazy rhetoric, always. For Malathi, it was only the truth that would endure. How lucky we are to have had Mala, to take on the big concerns of our time and to examine them with such love and care. She concludes her essay on the Sigiri frescoes by conjuring the power of those painted women. Their smile lingers, as she says. We hope that the readers of these essays will see, as we do, that Mala's vast humanity and Mala's irrepressible smile also lingers. Thank you.
Chulani, you need to unmute.
Thank you, Caryll, and thank you, Sonali. And good morning, everybody. I just want to begin by saying that I feel really grateful to have had the opportunity to work on this publication with this wonderful group of women, to remember Mala and her work, and also to be here today with all of you to remember her. So I'm going to read from chapter 4 of the book, Production and Embodiment of Respectability, Gendered Demeanors in Colonial Ceylon. This is a chapter from Mala's PhD, which was later published as a chapter in Collective Identities, edited by Michael Roberts in 1997. In her PhD, this chapter was really foundational to her analysis of the politics of motherhood deployed by the Southern Mothers Front. It's an incredibly detailed, nuanced, and beautifully written chapter, which draws on a lot of historical archival material, and I think remains important to any understanding of gendered norms in Sri Lanka today. So I'm going to read some excerpts from the conclusion of the chapter, which more or less summarizes her argument. In this paper, I have attempted to theorize the category of respectability by unpacking a particular historical moment of its embodiment by Sinhala and Tamil women in colonial Ceylon. I have specifically focused on the interpellatory practices within the girls' boarding schools in order to scrutinize the micro-technologies of power that impinged on a girl's body, the way she ate, walked, and sat, how she spoke, dressed, and married, and was supervised, routinized, corrected, punished, or rewarded and transformed. My interrogation of the category of respectability, I would like to reiterate, is not premised on the suggestion that Ceylonese society did not subscribe to notions of propriety and morality prior to the arrival of the missionaries, but rather that such indigenous moral orders were remade in an articulation with Victorian Christianized notions of morality within a colonial relation of power. The encompassing modified formation of respectability that was produced thus signified the interplay of both systems. It retained some aspects and redacted yet other aspects of both systems. It is crucial, however, to remember that such seemingly delicate negotiations were occurring within an unequal power relation that was played out to its most extreme limit in the charity boarding school. A good English education provided significant symbolic capital. For boys, it was also essential for the procurement of high prestige jobs in the colonial government and for pursuing higher education overseas. For the girls, the boarding school was the indisputable site of the production of the modern woman who was domesticated, virtuous, and feminine, a chaste and accomplished wife who developed into an intelligent and competent mother. Thus, the boarding school, though educating a minuscule percentage of the native population, was instrumental in producing and reproducing an important segment of the bourgeoisie that was at the forefront of the nationalist reform movement in the latter half of the 19th century. The importance of educating the native woman was framed by a concern not only to convert her on the premise that if you convert the mother, you convert the whole family to Christianity, but also to a Christian manner of living and being. While the missionaries may not have succeeded very well in their original venture of converting her to Christianity, they surely were victorious in producing a moral transformation within her that was physically manifested in her dress, domestic skills, marriage patterns, and demeanor. The microtechnologies of power that were harnessed in the pursuance of such a social revolution were ironically also those that were transposed to Buddhist and Hindu girls' schools that were founded by nationalist reformers during the latter half of the 19th century. The Hindu and Buddhist girls' schools took extra special care to eradicate the propagation of such anglicized and Christianized vices by a move to indigenize and sacralize their curricula. Yet while the content of the curricula was somewhat modified, many of its structures were retained. The daily routines and drills, rules of behavior, the regulation of attire, and most importantly, instruction in practicality and respectability through domestic science courses in cooking, sanitation, first aid, thrift, and needlework that continues to this day in all schools. In this paper, I have focused on the normative ordering of a gendered moral demeanor and manner of living among a small percentage of the Ceylonese population during the early 19th century. I have not pursued the stories of those who refused such an interpolation, or even those who resisted attending missionary schools altogether. In fact, I suggest the yield of this work lies in the very delineation of such a norm, the production and embodiment of respectability. It is a norm that continues to circumscribe contemporary Sri Lanka women's behavior. If we do not understand its production and dissemination, we will not understand how to transform it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chulani. That was really quite beautiful to listen to. Malathi's words, that is. Rai?
Thanks, Caryll. Much like Chulani, I am also just very, very honored to have had the opportunity to work with the 5 women that I share this screen with. I think it also, in a way, reminds me that Dr. M's work continues to bring women together, not just through her work, but through friendship and through all these other really beautiful collections. So I'm very thankful for this. And I just wanted to start off with that. And I think already there's been multiple mentions of her work in terms of writing about motherhood and on protesting and activism, which for me is something that I also find that I can resonate with. So I was very naturally drawn to chapter 5 of our book today. And the portion that I'll be reading to you is on motherhood as a space of protest, women's political participation in contemporary Sri Lanka. And I'm using, and I'll be talking, or at least I'll be reading through just a couple of paragraphs, but I think in the last few days has also been a conversation about motherhood and about different ways in which we protest. And I thought this was really powerful. And so I chose to read this to you today. Tears and curses. The complicated interplay between the mother's front and the state operated on the common terrain that took for granted the authenticity and efficacy of a mother's tears and curses. Though the state could retaliate that these women were not good mothers and that they were pawns of a political party, it could not deny the mother's right to weep or curse because, after all, that was what was expected of women. Rather, when these women wept or cursed en masse and in public, it became an embarrassment for the state, which then organized its own fronts to engage in counter rituals. In a context of violence and terror, the tears and curses of the mothers finally stirred a nation and shamed a government. It is important to bear in mind that tears and curses differed in signification. A mother's tears are a familiar emotive trope in the arts and a part of public practices of grieving, such as funerals. A mother's curses are a familiar yet less discussed practice, mostly restricted in the private religious domain. The SLFP had manipulated the emotive powers of tears at the Mother's Front rallies it had organized, but it was a spontaneity of the women themselves during the Padayatri that had suggested an alternative avenue of protest that was not merely emotive, but powerful in its staging as well as in its ferocity and its call for revenge. The presumption inherent in a curse that it could bring about change through the intercession of a deity complicates efforts for a believer such as the president. To stall such change for a curse now transcends the human. The use of curse as public protest and the use of religious ritual as resistance not only had no precedent in Sri Lanka, but could circumvent emergency law that were applicable to standard forms of political protest, such as demonstrations and rallies. To ban the right to religious worship was something an autocratic government that repeatedly defined itself as a protector of people's interests would dare not do. Not that the government did not toy with the idea. After all, the gates of the Kali Amman Kovil were locked when the Mother's Front arrived, and the alternative media were quick to highlight such blatant violations of human rights. For the members of the Mother's Front, weeping and cursing were nothing new. What was new was the gaze of an entire nation upon them, and that their cause had achieved national prominence. One could also point out that despite their participation in mass movement, their activism continued to be limited to tears and curses. It was quite common for politicians at the Mother's Front rallies to exhort the mothers that it was time to stop weeping and to move beyond, while at the same time congratulating them for having brought upon the sudden disclosures by former Deputy Inspector General of Police, Udugampola, the unnerving of Premadasa, and even the death of Vijayaratna. This circumscribing of the mothers can chiefly be attributed to the fact that they had merely exchanged one structure of power driven with gender and class inequalities for another. Socialized within a society that defines women primarily through familial subject positions, such as wives and mothers, these women might nevertheless have managed to both mobilize and transcend these categories. They had chosen to organize themselves as Mother's Front in the North and East, in the North and East had done, as the Madres in Argentina continue to do. Mobilized and founded by a group of men who are representatives of a powerful political party, these women never pushed to break out of gender and class stereotypes or to form links with other women's groups. Thank you.
Now over to Kanchana.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Vraie, Chulani, Sonali, Radhika, Caryll for getting together with us and doing this work. And while I know Radhika will give a vote of thanks, I also want to thank ICS for the support they've given in bringing this volume together. And to all of you who are there with us on a Monday morning, I realize this is probably like work time, peak work time for most people. So thank you for being here. I am going to, in a bit, to kind of start wrapping up, I'm going to read sections of the foreword, which really is about Malathi and the breadth and depth of her work. And so I'll go to that. Once in a generation, there comes a scholar who understands her country and its people with such profound sensitivity that her work becomes emblematic. Malathi de Alwis is one such scholar. Her work reflects a deep understanding of 3 decades of Sri Lanka's most turbulent history. She's always at the empirical and conceptual battlefront, recording, analyzing, and reassessing not only the revealed realities, but also our modes of analysis and reasoning. Her work is rich with anthropological detail, capturing suffering within the tapestry of human relations that weaves around daily lives of people living at the borders. This understanding is informed by frameworks of analysis that are cutting edge, deeply philosophical, while maintaining a moral anchor in the pursuit of social justice. Beyond being a chronicler, Malathi's work is brilliant because of the conceptual analysis she brings to her studies. She is at ease with the greatest thinkers of the world, and her work is deeply influenced by progressive critical scholars, especially post-structural and postmodernist approaches, although she is very much at ease on drawing on Marxian and Gramscian thought when her research necessitates it. She is very aware of the scholarship around the world that is relevant to her research. She lived and breathed scholarship, and her sensitivity to social justice gave it an edge that made it relevant for anyone who believed in social change. So to go towards summing up our impressions and value of Malathi's contribution, Malathi loved knowledge, but she knew it was conditioned and immersed in power relations. Her aim was to liberate us from the shackles that constrain our minds so that we can move forward with the understanding that the real is also performative. And therein lies the hope. Beyond the realism and the determinism of some of her intellectual mentors, Malathi always believed transformation was possible, and she worked tirelessly to make it happen. She believed that intellectuals themselves cannot be separated from history. To refuse to act in this world is to be complicit. Malathi was never ostentatious. She was always connected to nature, and rarely did she foreground herself. Malathi's memory will remind us that the best of our intellectuals have always been defined by the rigor of their scholarship, the deep sensitivity of her understanding of this work, but even more importantly, the abiding commitment she had to social justice concerns both in Sri Lanka and the world over at one level. I will leave it at that and hand it over to Radhika to give the final words for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kanchana. The title of this book is Her Smile Lingers, and everyone who knew Mala recognized that smile when she was bemused and appreciative. I think she would be wearing that smile today. I think she would recognize what we have all recognized in her, the great love that she has in the intellectual community. She was a brilliant and extraordinary scholar who, as Kanchana said, was very committed to issues of social justice. I want to give the vote of thanks, first to say that this book is really a labor of love. As you can see, the editors are childhood friends, colleagues, and people she has mentored. From the moment she left us, there was this desire to collect and collate and preserve her writings. This was paramount in our minds. Despite the many obstacles of COVID and administrative coordination, we managed to bring the volume out to commemorate her first death anniversary. I would like to thank the editors for taking time off from very busy schedules to collect and carefully edit all the essays in this volume. They did it painstakingly. My email section is full of those very detailed changes that a careful reading brings. And they did it with a great deal of dedication. And this is, I think, a testament of their love for Malathi. Their prior knowledge and intimacy with her work made it easy to put this volume together. The collegiality and the sense of common purpose that bound all of us together was truly something special. I want to thank Mario at ICS for quickly and readily agreeing to support this effort. And at my ICS, Mausel and Nadine assisted us with the administrative support and copy editing. They were always ready to answer our demands and were very, very supportive of the effort. We must also thank Gihan McKay for designing a cover that captures Malathi's writing, the essence of it, and he did it at very short notice. We would also like to thank Malathi's family members who were very supportive and who helped us recover some of the essays. They have been extraordinarily strong, and I must say, giving us at least the vibrations we could feel to go ahead with this project. It is perhaps noteworthy that one of the first publications of Malathi's work after her death comes from ICS. It is time to recover the writings and activism of a generation of scholars who dominated political and social discourse in the 1980s and 1990s. Scholarship and activism at SSA, ICS, and MERGE, of which Malathi was an integral part, challenged the dominant discourses and structures that entrenched racism, violence, and inequality. Perhaps rereading Malathi will help us recover the spirit of that era that once held us together as a community. So now I'm going to give the floor over to Caryll I think she's going to field some questions or comments from the floor. Thank you.
Hello to everybody. Yes, I have posted on the chat group, if in case anyone has a question, that would be great to post it there. And Kanchana has shared the address, email address, because someone had a question on how to get a copy of the book. You can always email to admin@ices.lk, and they will, I'm sure, be very happy to forward one to you. We have some friends of Malathi's and colleagues from Malathi's from overseas who joined us as well at this very difficult hour. To all of you, thank you for being with us. And once again, if you need a copy of the book, maybe ICES will help you obtain one. To all my sisters here, feminist sisters here, who have been very much in support and in touch with each other. We actually put this book together in the last, I don't know, seriously 4 or 5 months. And we were determined to get this out in time for the 1-year anniversary of Mala's passing. So thank you very much for being with me and being with us, helping and prodding each other to try and finish this. ICES and Mario, thank you so much for all of your support. We do appreciate it. And Gihan McKay, again, thank you very much for coming in with that wonderful, wonderful cover at the last minute. And to Mala's friends and family hope this is to you also a great support to see Mala's work being continued. And I hope that it will be used as a book that the young scholars can refer to and be used as a tool going forward. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. Stay healthy in these times, and hopefully we will continue to carry Mala's work forward. Goodbye. That's because there's no questions from anyone. So thank you and bye.